All right, let's get more now on this entire story and bring in Peter Kaufman, President and Head of Restructuring and Distressed M&A at the Gordian Group. He's been calling this story right from the beginning, but now the story takes another twist, courtesy of Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg. I think a bit of a shocker, 2 losses, then a win. What's your take on this, Peter?
Well, good morning, Brian. As I said actually on this show some months ago, my prediction was that this deal would get rammed through bankruptcy court and it would get rammed through the appellate process, but maybe the Supreme Court might step in and do something about it. So far, so good from that perspective. One might call it a green shoot in the fields of justice at this juncture.
Are you saying that the law and precedent might actually matter to the Supreme Court?
Well, it might. But to be a pragmatist, were I advising the government and Chrysler, I would be urging them to go cut a new deal with the creditors and everybody else, because to me, it's a high-stakes poker game. If clearly they won't want to cut a new deal if the Supreme Court then says let the sale close. But if the Supreme Court decides to have a hearing, they're going to wish that they'd had the leverage to recut the deal the way it should have been done in the first place.
Well, the deal that Indiana would have signed on, forget whether it's legal or not. Indiana was willing to do the deal at $2.5 billion for the senior secured lenders. And remember, the government said no. $2 billion. At the end of the day, $2.5 billion, had that been the offer to the senior secured lenders, would have translated into $1.5 million, $1.5 million for the Indiana pensioners. So because the government didn't do that deal, they're faced with the possibility that it could die.
What about the implications for General Motors bankruptcy of this?
Well, I think that depends on what happens next. If there's a recutting of the deal, as I'm hoping that there will be, then that's an implication for GM that they're going to have actually have some following the bankruptcy code and the bankruptcy law. If this thing gets kicked back without any hearings by the Supreme Court and the deal goes ahead and closes, I think GM and the Treasury Department will be similarly emboldened to try and ram that through. So I think it depends what the next step is. But again, I think that right now is the time to recut this deal, adhering to bankruptcy law and trying to get something consensual amongst the creditors.
There are many people in Washington, no doubt, who are steaming right now, I would imagine. Right? Do you agree with that? I mean, they feel that their deal, if you will, has been stepped on.
I would agree with that.
Why weren't they listening to you and everybody else who was raising Cain about them essentially throwing corporate finance and law out the window?
I don't know.
Where does it go, though, Peter? What's going to be the result here? You know, what do we do? I mean, what if Chrysler and Fiat can't reach a deal?
Well, I think that there are lots of ways that this could happen. For example, the courts, General Motors, Chrysler, and the government could decide to throw all of the consideration that they've got allocated to the unions and the creditors, the non-union creditors, into a pot and say, Fiat, go ahead, close on this, and we'll let the courts figure out who gets what. But the pragmatic approach here seems to me to be to recut the deal now and not let this go down the path of the Supreme Court, because there are a couple juicy issues for the Supreme Court. One is this a proper use of TARP money in the industrial sector? And number two is, do we care, some of us do, about the systemic implications of what happens to our whole corporate finance structure if you start taking away the underpinnings of the bankruptcy code whenever it suits a governmental policy interest?
That to me is the interesting angle. It's the bigger con law angle, right? Is this a constitutional use of taxpayer money? Because now there opens up, right, a potential can of worms for all TARP money, which may be a reason why we're seeing this sudden change of heart with the government. Okay, you can pay it back. What if there's a challenge on that?
There is a challenge on that.
Well, if it goes to where it is now, Supreme Court. We haven't seen that type of analysis yet.
But the issue of using the TARP funds for Chrysler or GM, for $500 million, the issue does not get resolved. We already know that Indiana will walk, we're happy. We're the Indiana pensioners. We'll take a deal. Just give us $500 million more. And that issue doesn't get settled till perhaps there's a lawsuit with the GM bankruptcy when they go to sell the good assets to the new GM.
But in the real world that I live in, where I advise companies, boards of directors on what to do here, you need options, you need optionality, and you need to try and get a consensual deal through hammers and sticks. The government had plenty of hammers and sticks, but they didn't have any carrots and olive branches to try and get something consensual. This all could have been avoided, as we've been discussing for months now.
Well, we got thousands of unsecured creditors with GM just 49. GM is going to make Chrysler look easy, isn't it?
It really depends on what happens here with the Supreme Court.
But wait, but when an unsecured
we got to take a break.
I'm getting yelled at. We're getting yelled at.
Right.
Got to take a break. Peter Kaufman of the Gordian Group, thank you very much. The story far from over.